The year is 1959. A group of experienced hikers decide to head out on an expedition into the cold, unforgiving wilderness of the Ural Mountains in old Soviet Russia. What should have been an exciting adventure, however, turns into one of the most chilling and mysterious tragedies ever. Welcome back to Beau Videos and episode 18, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In January 1959, 10 experienced skiers and hikers, mostly students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set off for a challenging expedition to reach Ottertorten, a low-lying peak in the Ural Mountains. The group was led by highly skilled 23-year-old hiker Igor Dyatlov. All the group were familiar with the area, all the group knew the landscape like the back of their hand, and all were used to the testing conditions. Yet this expedition would prove to be their toughest and end up being their last. It would also lead to one of the most baffling cases ever investigated in the old Soviet Union and would leave investigators utterly perplexed. This is a weird one and will have you scratching your head, trust me. See, whilst at their campsite, or base camp if you like, what could cause 9 experienced campers be so terrorized, so frightened, that they would cut a hole in their tent and flee in every direction without even have time to put on their socks or shoes, and all having their lives ended in the most bizarre circumstances? What on earth spooked them? Come with me as we take a real good look into what happened. Despite an intense criminal investigation by the authorities, including the group's own photos and own journal entries from their last moments, the case still remains unsolved. As recent as 2020, after briefly reopening the case, the Russian government has issued a statement on what they think happened. But this statement has not pleased all, and serious questions are still left unanswered. Let's try and answer them and put this case to bed for good. It's early morning on January the 23rd, 1959. A group of 10 hikers board a train heading for the Ural Mountains in the old Soviet Union. It was a group of 8 men and 2 women. Over the next 2 or 3 days, they would change transport several times, including a bus and a truck and a horse and sleigh, until finally setting out on foot and skis on their adventure. 5 days into the adventure, one of the group, Yuri Yudin, was forced to pull out of the expedition due to a reoccurring sciatic nerve problem, but the rest of the crew continued as planned. Yuri would later state that his sciatic nerve problem saved his life and possibly his soul. These photos were taken just before they parted ways, and it would be the last time he saw his friends alive. Each member had extensive experience in winter trekking, and they had the physical endurance and the skills necessary to take this formidable journey. The group resumed their expedition across the snow-covered backwoods and noted as much as they could, using diaries, as well as taking numerous photos. Recovered journal entries and photos suggest that the trek progressed as they expected, and they encountered no complications, just plenty of snow and the bitterness of that environment. Eventually, they reached the foot of a mountain known to the indigenous Mansi tribe population as Dead Mountain. They spent the better part of the day progressing up the slope and eventually decided to set up camp only a few hundred feet from its peak. The last sentence in their journal read, "It is hard to imagine such a wonderful comfort, yet there's a howling wind and we're hundreds of miles away from human contact. Fantastic." This wasn't actually that accurate, as the Mansi people, which is an indigenous population that live in the Ural Mountains, had several small makeshift villages close by, about 3 miles away. Anyhow, a couple of weeks later, friends and family began to worry. No one has heard from Igor Dyatlov or any of the other members of the group. After much debate, a team of volunteers, also experienced hikers, eventually head out to find them. A few days later, the search party finally locate the camp high up on the slope. it didn't take too long for the search and rescue team to find them. It's obvious from the very beginning that something has gone horribly wrong. The tent is covered by a thin coating of fresh snow. An encouraging sign, though, is that the expedition's belongings and equipment are found orderly placed inside and outside the tent. But strangely, the tent's door was still zipped up, but its side had been slashed open with a knife from the inside. The search and rescue team noticed 9 pairs of footprints leading from the tent in different directions. They lead search volunteers down the slope towards a nearby woods. They could be tracked for about half a mile from the tent until being completely covered by snow. They continued in the direction of the footprints until they found themselves under a large cedar tree at the edge of a forest. Next to the dead embers of an improvised campfire, they found the first bodies. The frozen bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were way underdressed for the outdoors. No jackets, no pants, no gloves, no hats, no boots, or anything else you'd expect given the freezing climate. Only thin cotton shirts, underwear, and socks. At the time of their death, it would have been around minus 30 degrees. Also, the cedar tree next to the bodies had signs of damage, as if someone had tried to climb it. Why would they try to climb a tree, especially in the circumstances they were in? Were they both trying to hide from someone or running from something? The next 3 hikers were found at all differing distances between the tent and the tree. These bodies were covered by a couple of inches of snow. They were better dressed than the previous 2, but not by much, as they still lacked essential items like boots, hats, and gloves. Whether this has any significance or not, all 3 were found facing the direction of the tent as if they were struggling or attempting to return to the campsite at the moment of their death. While some of them had minor injuries, all 5, including the first 2, had died of hypothermia. It should also be noted that 4 out of the 5 had died with a quantity of alcohol in their system and were, as stated by the medical examiner, probably drunk. The final 4 hikers were found at the bottom of a small hill in a ravine about 100 feet from the trees in the opposite direction to the tent. This is where the search team became very anxious, because 3 of them had sustained severe, unexplainable injuries. 1 had a fractured skull and 2 had multiple fractures to the ribs, and all had suffered massive internal bleeding. Later, the medical examiner would conclude the injuries had been sustained from a fall and went on to compare them to that of a car crash. This was a weird conclusion, as the ravine in which they were found was only about 6 feet high. The injuries had been sustained while they were still all alive and were so severe that they could not have been inflicted by another person. In other words, another human being. Oh, that's not all. 2 of the bodies had their eyes gouged out, and 1 of them was missing a tongue. And the 4th body had a broken nose and a deformed neck, but was stated to have died of hypothermia. The body with the missing tongue also had part of her face missing. Several of the bodies had minor burns and bruising. Medical examiners were baffled every time they examined a body, and each time they found an injury. And just as mysterious as the injuries, 3 articles of clothing found on the bodies were later found to be radioactive. Radioactive way above normal levels. Let's backtrack just a bit, just for a moment. The hikers' last diary entries describe their camp setup on this fateful night. They seemed in good spirits, even though the weather was unforgiving. But sometime during the night, something happened, something so terrifying that it caused the entire group to cut open the tent and flee its safety. They fled into the cold, harsh wilderness, some without shoes, coats, or proper gear, into sub-zero temperatures. What could have caused 9 experienced hikers to leave the safety of their tent so suddenly and so unprepared? It is also reported in some journals over the years that a KGB agent had joined the group at the very beginning and was one of the 9 on the adventure. It was said that he joined because of his hiking and survival skills and would be a major plus for the young group. I have not been able to find any conclusive evidence to back this up, nor to discredit it. It is believed to have been Semyon Zolotaryov, and he was one of the group that suffered severe internal injuries. That's similar of a car crash, if you remember. In the decades since the Dyatlov Pass Incident, bearing in mind, prior to this, the pass was just simply known as a number and a coordinate on a map, numerous theories have been proposed, each trying to explain the hiker's fate. Let's explore some of these ideas and the credibility of each one. One of the most common explanations thrown out there is an avalanche. Some so-called experts believe the group fled the tent fearing an imminent avalanche. However, these experts miss several clear and obvious things. There were no signs that an avalanche occurred, and the injuries sustained by some of the hikers don't align with typical avalanche patterns or victims. How on earth does an avalanche gouge out somebody's eyes or rip out a tongue, for instance? Oh, another thing I forgot to tell you. One of the hikers was found to have bitten a piece of flesh from his own arm, and the medical examiner found the flesh still in his mouth. Is that what happens when an avalanche is on its way? Does someone always take a chunk out of their arm and try to eat themselves? Nonetheless, the avalanche theory remains the most popular. Another theory suggests katabatic winds. These are powerful, fast-moving winds that sometimes move swiftly down a mountain's ridge. These winds can get quite strong and can creep up suddenly. The winds may have hit the camp, confusing the group and causing panic to set in. But once again, this doesn't explain the severe trauma suffered by some of the victims, nor the cutting of the tent from the inside. Plus, the tent was only covered in light snow when the search and rescue team found the campsite. Some believe the hikers may have stumbled into a secret Soviet military testing ground, parachute mines, or even a missile test gone wrong. This could explain the sudden flight from the tent and the severe injuries. Also, the alleged KGB group member maybe was there to either discreetly divert them away from the testing ground or to advise them once they found out about it. But don't forget, he, Mr. KGB man, was one of the victims. But we never rule anything out on this channel. On or around the day of the incident, there were reports of strange lights in the sky by both locals and from afar. Bearing in mind, this was a remote area. Not a lot of local inhabitants or villages, hence not a lot of lights. These type of local people tend not to lie about things like that. If the local indigenous people saw lights, then 99% of the time, that's what they saw. Unless, of course, they were part of the problem. Maybe some of the local tribe took umbrage to the expedition across their lands and attacked the group. Back then, these folk, tribespeople, didn't live like us, and they didn't fight like us either. Or maybe the lights came from unidentified flying objects. Did they stumble across a UFO landing site or surprise a race of extraterrestrial beings? Or a meeting between said beings and the military? Were the group murdered by beings not from this realm? That could explain the eye gouging or the missing tongue, etc. But it would also mean that an alien probably entered the tent in the middle of the night, making everyone scramble out of the cut hole. Unlikely, but you never know. I've mentioned this on the channel before, but could it be government infrasound testing, a type of low-frequency sound wave? Some say it can be used as a weapon. This has also been proposed. This phenomenon could have created vibrations in the tent that caused extreme panic, leading the hikers to flee into the cold. But like the other theories, it doesn't fully explain the physical trauma, nor a motive really, but a proposed theory nonetheless. Finally, there are more extreme and speculative ideas. What, more extreme than the last idea? Did they encounter a Yeti? Was that the real reason for the expedition to discover the elusive, abominable snowman, the Bigfoot, or the Yeti? Did they already have prior knowledge of such a creature and was out to track him or her? Did they find one, and did they pay the ultimate price for finding one? The Mansi peoples do tell tales of a mystical being that roams the Ural Mountains. They don't call it a Yeti or describe it as one. They say, in their own folklore, that it's a huge man-like figure that can move in and out of our dimension and is extremely strong with an aggressive temper. Did they bump into one? I know I wouldn't like to. In 2020, Russian authorities reopened the case and concluded that the group likely died due to a slab avalanche, a variation of the original avalanche theory. However, many still question the conclusion due to the unusual injuries and the unanswered questions that remain. The incident became so mysterious, so perplexing, that now, ever since Igor Dyatlov and his friends set out on their fateful expedition, that the very pass that they used is now named after Igor. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most unsolved and unexplained mysteries in modern history. While many theories have been proposed, the truth still remains elusive. Decades later, we are left to wonder what truly happened on that cold, silent night in the Ural Mountains. Was it just an accident? Did an avalanche take the lives of these 9 hikers? Is the government somehow to blame? Are there aliens and UFOs at these remote locations? Has Yeti pulled off yet another one? Or was it something else? Something yet to be proposed? You be the judge. Thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. What do you think happened? I think it was a Yeti. Let me know in the comments. Please don't forget to tickle that like button as well. It helps the channel more than you think. Anyhow, hope this video wasn't too intense. Intense. Get it? Shut up. See you in the next video. Bye for now.